Speaking of amateur wrestling, Devin, I've been following you for a while with your professional wrestling career, but I started reading up on you and I didn't know that you were an amateur wrestler as well. It looked like you had a pretty successful amateur wrestling career. What was it after being an amateur wrestler that fascinated you and made you want to get into the world of pro wrestling?
For me, I wanted to be a pro wrestler, and I got into amateur wrestling because I always heard that having a good amateur wrestling base would help you be a better pro wrestler. So that's what I did. I ended up winning the equivalent of states twice. I won the nationals in freestyle once, and I was the alternate for Greco-Roman for the London Olympic Games. So I had a decent amateur wrestling career. I never went. I should have gone to university for it. I had scholarships at University at Buffalo and Simon Fraser University in British Columbia here, but I wanted to go straight into pro wrestling. So instead, I went over to the Dungeon in Calgary and got into pro wrestling. But now I know, I didn't know at the time because they had just started the procedure, but now WWE actually recruits out of amateur wrestling. So I probably would have had a better chance had I taken the educational route and done college wrestling.
Was there
Uh,
anything about amateur wrestling that you saw inside of pro wrestling or just two completely different worlds? I would imagine
no,
so.
you can do it. Particularly, I know Dan and I did some amateur wrestling at the match that we
Yes.
had. And if you ever run out of things to do in a pro wrestling match, if it's not a fully planned pro wrestling match, you could just amateur wrestle. And also you can protect. Sometimes people do try and take advantage of you in there, less now than when I started. And probably it was more prevalent when Mr. Severn was in there, but not that anyone would mess with him. But it's good to know how to protect yourself a little bit, I think.
No. Yeah, no, I think that well, that's we're getting. I go back to what I said a little bit earlier that the the marquee says professional wrestling. Will give them at least a little bit of wrestling. It's and that's where just doing some a quick little go behind, pick them on up, bring them on down. If they could do like a little sit out, a little turn in, a little stand up, work the hand action a little bit there. I mean, there's some simple things I think that could be incorporated into almost every kind of a match. And I know that in my own training facility down in Coldwater, Michigan, that was what I pride myself in was the fact that all of my athletes that were pursuing professional wrestling, they worked on actual wrestling mats first. They and then as they worked on all doing all these various kinds of moves and stuff like that. Again, they're still doing body slams things of that nature, but they're doing on mats. I have a crash pad, a couple crash pads that they get to practice on the crash pads at first, so that it's not as tough on their bodies in the process. So, but then eventually they got to be able to do it inside of that ring. But then I had the moment that you're at that point that you wanted to start to do matches. I tell you, start formulating the matches now. Start learning that ring presence, how to circle, how to tie up, how to work it from the tie up positions, and then doing shows of strength and things of that nature. I could put that together, but then they would have to pass what I call blue mat matches, only because the mat was blue. But it was a mat the exact same size as a professional wrestling ring. And what you had to do is you had to walk on there with your partner, and you had to be again. There were two separate entrances, but the more you stepped on this mat, you had to be in your character, and you had to wrestle a bare bones minimum for your first match, bare bones minimum of a 5 minute match, and it had to make some sense. But you have no turnbuckles, you have no ropes, you have nothing but a mat. So again, it's not like you can say, "Okay, here, Eric, I'm going to whip you off the ropes, and then come in, I'm going to close you, lady, and I'm going to whip you the turnbuckle." There are no turnbuckles, so that was very challenging to a lot of them. But on a good note, there's been sometimes when they would be invited to be on a show, and maybe the professional wrestling ring did not show up. And the show must go on. And so the high school, like, they'll roll out the rest of the mat. And most of the wrestlers are going to be lost because all of their matches are so designed for ring ropes, turnbuckles, flying this. I mean, when you look at matches nowadays, especially Devin, you watch a match nowadays, who is it climbing up on that top rope? It's so much gymnastics, high flying, but will your career be longer or shorter if you become one of those flyers?
And one of the things that turns me off as a viewer is some of these moves today. Like, it's clear you have to cooperate with the opponent to pull them off. They don't look like you could even do it in a real fight. So it just looks like two people cooperating to do some type of fancy flip, and it's not something I want to see. I want to see something that at least could be believable.
Yes. No, I totally agree. It's like looks like we're just in cooperation with each other, but at point in time, I'm going to double cross you at the end. That's really about the only significance I look at it as.